As I'm sure many of you saw, I'm reading your comments as I speak, the news was plastered with coverage of Donald Trump's big day in court yesterday. So first, courtroom sketches showed Trump scowling with his arms folded in court, where he pleaded not guilty to the 37 felony charges against him. After leaving court, Trump met with supporters at a Cuban restaurant in Miami, where they held a prayer circle for him. Later that night, Trump held a campaign rally in New Jersey where he slammed the quote-unquote sham federal indictment, calling it the quote most heinous abuse of power in U.S. history. Cable news followed the events of the day, but depending on which network you watch, the events were covered in vastly different ways. At one point, Fox News put up this text at the bottom of the screen reading, quote, "Wannabe dictator speaks at the White House after having his political rival arrested." They were referring to President Biden, in case you didn't figure that out. Meantime, over at CNN, anchor Jake Tapper had enough of producers playing video from Trump's stop at the Miami restaurant. Take a look.
The folks in the control room, I don't need to see any more of that. He's trying to turn this in. He's trying to turn it into a spectacle, into a campaign ad. That's enough of that. We've seen it already.
So get this, MSNBC took over the top spot for cable news. It's now #1 for breaking news. So what do we think, Tori, of the coverage of Trump? Also, I want to ask you specifically, because what went viral overnight was that text of the chyron on Fox News. Do you think that was purposeful? Do you think it was accidental? Maybe one rogue person in the control room? What would you say to that?
I first thought it was rogue because it was right before Hannity. And then Brian Kilmeade on that show where the text was called former President Trump. He called him the President of the United States when he addressed him as the New Jersey rally. Fox has now responded. I just got it in my ear as you were speaking because we were waiting all day. Fox has said the chyron, which means the text, was taken down immediately and addressed. I want to let you know that this chyron was up for a full 30 seconds, and in TV time, that's a long time to have a text up. If it's someone rogue, they need to be fired. But what a great example of the two different realities we're living in. There's no way to have a conversation if they think Joe Biden, first of all, had anything to do with the indictment. That's Department of Justice. That's 23 Floridians taking him in a grand jury indictment. But to say wannabe dictator arrests his political rival, that's what some people think is real. And over here, we're seeing someone held accountable for giving away or being sloppy about classified documents. No wonder we're not talking. We're not in the same universe. We're in two totally different places. So until the news gets to be like Cronkite, where it's just the news, at this point, these are opinion-related shows that are entering the stream and causing us to divide
I think you just highlighted the problem, and we see this kind of, it's what happened with sports television. If you think about it, people don't really watch SportsCenter like they used to because they can get scores on their phone. Do you know what rates on those sports channels? The things that are on in the morning, the debate shows. People want to hear your opinion. I think Tom Brady's the best. I think he's the worst. And they battle it out. That's what people are watching. So Fox and CNN are kind of like those dueling sports reporters where they have to pick a side. The idea of laying out the news, they tried that. And people can get the news kind of anywhere they want if they just want the plain news. People want to be told kind of what to think and how to look at these things, especially when you're talking about political terms that may be over some people's heads. So when you say the word dictator, I know what that is. If you say Senate subcommittee, I don't really know what that is.
That's a fair point, but the consequences behind if Tom Brady is the best or the worst are far different than the consequences that we're weighing when we're talking about the state of democracy, or if this is a dictatorship, or and the idea of the response too. That was the most non-response response.
The worst.
The idea that we were even asking earlier in the day before Fox issued a response whether it was a pre-produced chyron or graphic on the bottom, or if it was someone who went rogue, really speaks to the state of not only Fox News, but just cable news in general. I'm not surprised that CNN has lost out to MSNBC. I think that once the Trump town hall happened, a lot of people lost faith in the network. It looked as though they didn't understand their identity. And when you don't understand your identity, then no one can have faith in you.
That's a great point.
And I will push back on just one thing you said, Erica, really quickly. In terms of the consequence, I agree that obviously sports debates and the fate of our democracy they're not, as you would say, Tori, in the same universe. What I will say is that CNN and ESPN are worried about ratings and ratings only.
Yeah,
their business is not the fate of our democracy.
What are we going to do about it? Listen, and I know I'm going to pose a really controversial question here, because Tori, you always stick up for freedom of speech,
right?
And I get it, and the slippery slope, but to see that so many different broadcast channels and social media channels are shaping the narrative specifically to benefit their numbers.
Right.
Meanwhile, what are the repercussions? A very divisive America, not knowing where the disinformation is versus the facts.
An insurrection at the Capitol.
An insurrection at the Capitol. Should there be regulation?
Yeah, I would think so, but I think it's up to people to regulate themselves.
But they don't.
I know, but it's just going to that point, I don't trust mainstream media cable news, right? I try to go to Fox News, it's so biased. The wannabe, this guy, blah, 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 it's so extreme, right? That's what I'm talking about yesterday a little bit, the extremes. Then you go on the other side and say, don't say gay bill. That's not really what it is, but that's what people are meant to believe. I just want the facts. I don't care what they are. I just want the facts, and I want to be discerning. I listen to podcasts. I listen to The Daily. Very impartial, right? They tell you what the facts are. I listen to Breaking Points with Crystal and Sauger. That's where I get my news now. I don't trust cable shows, and I don't want to be pushed into thinking one way or the other, or to hate somebody or not hate somebody. I want to respect everybody, but that doesn't happen in today's America. You are labeled one thing, and people think that of you. Even if you're trying to be respectful and inclusive, people just, the way the media is, it's not. And Trump gets people elevated in their emotions, whether it's for or against, and cable news is hooked on, I'm going to run this because people get so worked up about it. It doesn't matter if they like it or don't. We're getting eyeballs. Well, that's starting to fade a little bit, and people are starting to be more discerning and find their own news source.
But to put a finer point on it, the town hall that was that unmitigated disaster, the new head of CNN is out.
Right.
Because there was consequences,
because the ratings are down.
Well, what do you think about Jake Tapper on the other side? Do you think Jake Tapper should have not told the control room to shut that down? Now, it did play, though, for a while.
I was going to say, first of all,
that was performative, or do you really think he meant that?
First of all, A, it played for a while, but B, I was a little perturbed. Here's why. Trump has been arrested for federal criminal charges on the Espionage Act. That's one thing. He is also the leading Republican presidential candidate. You need to cover both. You can't just cover one or the other. So when Jake Tapper says he's at this making a campaign stop, at some point, that's news too. He's leading.
I disagree with you. Go ahead, Erica.
No, I agree with what you're saying. I do think that both need to be covered, but when you see the chyron, the graphic at the bottom, and it's talking about the indictment, it's talking about him being in court.
And the arrest, let's remember he was arrested.
Right, like that was the subject of that particular segment. So why are we showing a campaign stop under that heading? Because it's very confusing to people.
Agreed, but he does that on purpose. He goes right from the courthouse as a criminal defense.
No, he does it, so but is it CNN's responsibility to discern the difference between the two?
I think it can't, because he is the #1. He's leading Ron DeSantis 61% to 23. You don't cover that, that's missing a large portion of your audience.
You're also missing out on ratings. People look at him.
But then you're glamorizing his indictments.
It doesn't matter. That's still the party that is in charge of half of the population. You got to cover it. It's news.